was a two-stage process. The first stage was overcoming the resistance of stopping saying no to God. And then the second step was actually doing something practical about it. So I left Llanelli, I went to university at Oxford, slightly famous university. Had a great 3 years there, made lots of friends, got deeply involved in the Catholic community there. And one of the friends I made invited me to a retreat with a movement called Youth 2000. So I'd done 2 years, I had a year of my degree left. It was the end of August. I was at this Catholic prayer festival, and a priest who was preaching invited everyone to take a quiet half hour out in the beauty of nature and reflect on things. And I was sitting there by a riverbank at Aylesford in Kent, and I was thinking, I've got a year left, I've got to start planning what I'm going to apply for after Oxford. Now, I'm young, I'm single, I'm male, I'm Catholic, that means there is a course of action available. No, I don't want to do that. No. But why don't I want to do that? Well, hang on. Do I believe that Jesus is smarter than me? Yes. So he knows better than I do what I should do. Do I believe that Jesus loves me? Yes. So he's got my best interests at heart. And here's the kicker. Do I call Jesus Lord in my prayers? I do. But he's not really my Lord unless I'm willing to do whatever he asks. So in that moment of logical clarity on the riverbank, I went, okay, Jesus, I surrender. Show me what you want me to do and I'll do it, even if it is the priest thing.
Oh, wow.
So I went back to university a month later and I talked to the university chaplain and I said, I'm thinking about priesthood.
Yeah.
And the chaplain said, Gareth, you're a very new Catholic. You've only been in the church for 3 years. Keep thinking about it, but it's too early for you yet. So do something else for a few years. And if it's still nagging away, then it'll be the right time.
Okay. So when he said that's too early for you, how did you take that? Did you agree with him, disagree with him, or?
I think it was a relief, actually, because I was still struggling to say yes to God at that point.
Okay.
And I still had my dream of being an astrophysicist, so I was kind of off the hook. So I'd offered myself to the priesthood, the system had said, not yet, so I was free to apply for a PhD.
Oh, wow.
Which I did, but then got turned down across the board. All the doors closed in my face, and to my own surprise, I found myself working for a gap year as lay chaplain at Nottingham University.
Wow.
So I made every pastoral mistake in the book that year, learned lots of things about what not to do when trying to share the faith with people. But during that year, Cardiff University headhunted me and said, there's a grant available now, come to Cardiff and do a doctorate on dust in distant galaxies.
Yeah, wow. So between the time when initially they said, no, priesthood isn't ready for you yet, and when you actually entered seminary, was there a time where you had second thoughts and you're thinking, oh, actually, should I go in the priesthood or should I not?
Well, I was always keeping it under review. And in the academic life, you have to keep applying for things. You do a PhD, but then if you want to go further, you have to find grants to do doctoral studies and things. So a year and a half into the PhD, once again, I went to prayer and I was asking the Lord, what do I do next? Is it time for the priesthood? Is it time to apply for academic work? Should I go and be a teacher of physics somewhere? And I went on another event with Youth 2000, this time over the New Year period. And I was driving a friend back from London to Bristol on the way to Cardiff. And I turned to her in the car. I said, I still don't know what I'm going to do after this doctorate, but when I become a priest, I shall... an idea had gone from somewhere up here, somewhere down here, and I knew it was the right time to do something about it. So that was the 6th of January, because you can't just be a priest. You've got to be a priest who belongs somewhere, either in a religious order or a diocese. Well, I'd met lots of religious orders, but I'd never really had a sense of belonging to any of them. And that was what the teaching that New Year from Youth 2000 had been about. There was a Franciscan priest who talked about the sense of belonging to a community as a way of discerning. So I knew there wasn't a community that stood out as the place I would fit in with a band of brothers. So that meant diocesan priesthood. So that meant finding a bishop to serve under. Would it be the Bishop of Menevia in West Wales? Well, I knew nothing in Menevia apart from my home parish. Would it be Birmingham Diocese, where Oxford was? Well, I'd made no contacts there outside Oxford. Nottingham was a long way from home. Now I was living in Cardiff, and because I was doing lots of work for the church voluntarily, things for Youth 2000 and things for charismatic renewal, I'd actually visited quite a lot of parishes and met quite a lot of priests in the Cardiff area. So in as much as you can belong to something as big and fuzzy as a diocese, I thought Cardiff's where I belong. So after 3 days of discerning, on the 9th of January, I knew the right thing to do was to contact the priest who was vocations director for Cardiff. So I went to the university chaplain in Cardiff and said, I think I want to look into priesthood, and he made the introduction, and then I started meeting with the vocations priest. And if they'd said, leave everything, pack up, go to seminary next week, I would have gone just like the apostles left their fishing boats. But in fact, they said, you're doing a PhD, that's important, we want you to finish before you can go to seminary. So it was another 2.5 years before I got my doctorate and went to start training for priesthood.
Wow. So when you entered training for priesthood, was there a particular, because you mentioned that you met with a lot of priests and you had lots of discussions. Was there a particular priest or even a saint or someone special who inspired you in your decision or inspired you on your journey into the priesthood, or who you look up to?
Not particularly.
No? Oh wow. Fair enough. Do you have so when you get confirmed as Catholic, did you choose a saint as your saint's name?
Well, my middle name is James, and I thought if that's good enough for 2 apostles, it's good enough for me.
Okay, so Saint
There's
James.
no Saint Gareth yet, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, all called to be saints. So you entered seminary and you did your studies. Was there particular writings that stuck out to you or carved you as you became a priest and spoke to you, basically?
One thing I grappled with at seminary was there was one papal text that threatened to derail my idea that science and faith could sit together comfortably. And this was a document from Pope Pius XII that came out in 1950 called Humani Generis. And it was looking at how we understand Genesis and Adam and Eve. He said that all Catholics are bound to believe that we're tainted by original sin because we all descend from the first Adam, the original sin. I thought, well, how do you mesh that with evolution? And I worried about that for a couple of years. And then I realized that if what evolution says is correct, take any trait that makes us distinctively human, whether that's walking upright or not having a tail or having a bigger brain that can do things, each of those genetic traits begins with a single mutation that then wins out in the population. So if somewhere in the human heritage there was the first ancestor who had a gene for a brain that could think in terms of right and wrong in a way in which no ancestor before that could, and that creature committed something wrong, knowing it was wrong, then every offspring of that creature would get both the genetic heritage of a brain that can think about right and wrong and the spiritual heritage of being the offspring of the first creature to sin. So actually, what biology says and what theology says are actually totally consistent. And that works because Pius XII was speaking about a single Adam, one ancestor. If he'd said there was an Adam and Eve and we were all descendants of a couple, that would be much harder to mesh with what we know about the evidence in biology. But to say we're all descended from a particular ancestor is true because each of the genetic traits that make us human go to that ancestor who had that trait, together with other ancestors who didn't.
Okay, so before with astrophysics, you sort of link theology and astrophysics together, and then obviously now I've got biology, so in your different areas of study, you've been able to link theology with different areas of science, which has been really interesting. But as it's said, there's like a shortage for the priesthood. That's said in England and Wales. For anyone who's looking to or thinking of becoming a priest, what sort of advice would you give to them? For anyone who's currently discerning and anyone who's currently praying, any sort of advice you can give them?
I think the key thing is to be a follower of Jesus first and foremost. Some people go to seminary because they think they're called to be priests, but in fact they're called to be holy. And we're all called to holiness. And for some of us, holiness is through priesthood. Now, others enter seminary because they're attracted by the trappings of the priesthood. They like the idea of wearing a cassock, of having a position in the community, or at the other end of the spectrum, being out there and serving people because they care about human beings and they're not too sure about who Jesus is. Well, seminary shapes and forms people, but in order to be a true disciple, first of all, it has to come out of your relationship with Jesus. You have to ask him, what do you want me to do with my life? And if that leads you into seminary and being his servant, it'll lead you down the healthiest path to priesthood.
So go back to RCI or even catechesis of children, would you say that before we start learning about theology, start learning about the Catholic Church, would you say that perhaps we need to go back to forming a relationship with Jesus first, or do you think we can just start learning about how the Catholic Church works? Do you think there's perhaps a better way of doing things?
I think we get things terribly wrong in this area. And here I'll talk about a book that transformed my priesthood, not in seminary, but a book I discovered after seminary.
Oh, wow.
Because the first few years of my ordained ministry, I was dealing with lots of parents who wanted their children baptized, or first communion for their children, or sometimes they wanted to get married. They weren't going to mass, they weren't darkening the door of the church, but they wanted a ceremony from the church. And I would try and encourage them back to church, and the conversation would go like this. Do you come to mass? No? Oh dear. Have you thought about coming to mass? What's stopping you from coming to mass? How can I help you come to mass? But it never worked, because you just give people a guilt trip, and you can't nag people into coming to mass if they don't want to. So I knew that was the wrong approach, but I was scratching my head to work out what's the right approach. And then around 2012, I read a book called Forming Intentional Disciples by Sherry Weddle.
Wow.
American laywoman, works with a Dominican priest in the Sion Institute in the States. And she was drawing on work that some evangelical Christians had done on why people become Christian, but she found it applied equally validly in a Catholic context. And what she realized was people drawn into a deep Catholic faith pass through 5 thresholds. First, they have to trust someone or something Catholic. Within that relationship, they hear the Catholic speaking about faith, and that stirs up curiosity. They start thinking, well, can it be true that Jesus is real and affects lives?
Yeah.
That's going to stir up resistance, because if you do follow Jesus, you've got to confront the sin in your life. So there's going to be some inner turmoil at that point. But once the person realizes this is too important not to take seriously, then they get through openness to change. Okay, I'm willing to take this seriously. That's a bit like my struggle on the banks of the river in Aylesford. Do I want to take Jesus seriously?
Yeah.
Well, I do. And then you start asking the questions, what does the church say about this? What does the Bible say about that? What would it really mean to become a member of the church? And finally, the 5th step is becoming an intentional disciple. I'm following Jesus, and that's not an accident. It's not, I've just ticked a membership box. I intend to be a follower of Jesus, and that's why I'm a member of the church. And once I knew those steps were there, I realized that so often we offer catechesis to people who aren't yet followers of Jesus. You can't give people answers to questions they're not yet asking.
Yeah.
And yet we take our 7-year-olds and say, you're 7 now, we're going to tell you all the answers to the questions you would be asking if you decided in your hearts that Jesus was real and you were going to follow him.
So rather than maybe, they've just hit a certain age, it's just actually see each child for where they're at individually. So for example, if they're just because they're 7, you don't necessarily put them into catechesis, you wait till they're actually ready and actually want to. That's really good. So if someone's watching this, they actually think of becoming a priest, they're discerning, we know that priests have a lot of duties, they're very busy, and especially some of the saints, such as I think St. John Vianney, Sir Henry Newman, who's now a saint, they did a lot of confessions, there's a lot of different things they balanced. So as a priest, how do you balance all your duties? Because there's many things to do.
A lot of it is about responding to demand.
Okay.
So not all priests work in parishes, but if you are a priest in a parish, you have to deal with the demands for baptisms, first communions, funerals, weddings, visiting the sick people in the parish. So some parishes have huge demand for that, others don't. It's about the population and the sort of area you're ministering to. So whenever you go to a new parish, first you have to work out how long does it take to respond to that demand and to do the admin that comes with running a parish. There's things you have to do every week, and coming up with a decent homily for the Sunday Mass. If you're going to preach well, you need to invest time in doing that. Getting a good day off is important. What I found has worked for me as a rhythm was I would arrange the Mass times in the parish so that on one weekday there would be a Mass in the morning, and the following weekday the Mass would be in the evening. So on the morning Mass day, I would leave the parish as quickly as I could and go to my parents' house and then put my feet up, watch television and not come back until the evening Mass the next day. So I was giving myself a bit more than 24 hours off in the knowledge that things are going to squeeze that. You're going to have to do some paperwork before you're out the door or return an urgent phone call. So getting away after your 10 o'clock Mass might mean it's still 1 p.m. by the time you can go out the door with a clear conscience. And inevitably there'll be families who say, we've just got to have a funeral on that day of the week. It's normally your day off because that's the only time Auntie from Argentina can come and be present or something. So as a priest, sometimes you have to take the sacrifice and make yourself available. But in order to be available to do that, you also have to protect your own rest time as much as you can, because the Sabbath was God's idea. It's not priests being lazy.
So you've been a priest since 2007, is that correct? So what would you say is part of your priesthood that perhaps people don't necessarily see, so that goes on behind the scenes? And so if someone's like discerning the priesthood, they may not initially realise until they actually into the position of a priest. Is there anything you would say?
I'd say the big surprise was what doesn't happen, actually. I'd assumed after ordination I would have parishioners beating a path to my door, wanting to talk about their spiritual lives and getting guidance and prayer, and lots of confessions, and sick people to be anointed every day. Well, unless you're the hospital chaplain of a hospital with an accident unit where the beep might go off a couple of times a day, apart from that, it's pretty quiet. I don't find people beat a path to my door and want to talk about their prayer life. And as a university chaplain once said to me, you'll find you spend more time in the priesthood unblocking drains than dispensing sacraments. Because there's always practical things to do around the plant of a parish. Every time I get to a new church, I seem to get a bigger bunch of keys and more plants and trees that need looking after. And of course, that's not all on you. You should get the laity of the parish to help out. But when people don't help, the buck stops here, and you find yourself having to deal with all manner of practical things about buildings and gardens and all the rest of it, when you can't get people in the parish who are available at the right time to deal with it.
Great. So, final few things. What's your favourite part about being a priest? Is there something that stands out?
There are moments when I'm hearing confessions and someone comes in and I don't know them from Adam, and it's bless me, Father, it's been 30 years since my last confession, and something has provoked them to come in, and it probably wasn't me. I just happened to be the priest on the spot who they've chosen. But knowing that you've reconciled someone to the church who's been away for so long, those are the moments where I need to come out of the confessional on the priest side afterwards and just jump up in the air a few times until I've got the joy out of my system.
Oh, brilliant. It's quite a special moment, that, for sure. And so you've read the New Testament. Have you also read the Old Testament now as well?
80%.
Oh, wow.
I read
Incredible.
through the whole of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, cover to cover.
Wow.
But I've read pretty much the rest of the Old Testament.
Do you have a favourite book that stands? Because I know that you mentioned how was John 6 that stood out to you as a child. Is there a particular book or chapter that particularly stands out to you, that you got like a favourite?
In the Old Testament, I love the book of Tobit, which is one of those books you only have in Catholic Bibles. Protestant ones. And among other things, it's probably the only example in the Bible of grace before sex.
Okay. Well, Pastor Gareth, thank you for spending time with Shekinah television. Been really good having this conversation with you. And and this is it.